November 1st, and that means it is the start of the Once Upon a Readathon hosted by Hannah Blackwell. And she has so many co-hosts for this readathon that I cannot list them all, but she has done so much work to host this readathon, and I am so excited to participate. I am on Team Wolves, and this is a fairy tale focused readathon. You do not have to read fairy tales to participate. However, since retellings are my favorite subgenre of fantasy, I decided that I would only read fairy tales for this readathon. So the first quest that I have to do is research the history of the apple tree, and I will be using the book Once Upon a Time, which is a short story collection of classic fairy tales. I'm excited to read a ton of the classic fairy tales before I dive into all of my retellings. A lot of these fairy tales I of course have read before, and I am excited to reread them. I'm also excited to read maybe a few fairy tales that maybe I haven't read before. There's quite a few in this book. I will be only doing one book per prompt or quest, I guess, in this readathon. So you will see me read all 5 books in this vlog and complete my quest for the Once Upon a Readathon TBR. So let's dive in. This one is not going to take me very long. It's only 250 pages. So let's dive in. Okay, so I finished my first book for the Once Upon a readathon, and that is Once Upon a Time, a collection of fairy tales. This was super cute. Some of the fairy tales were a little bit boring, but most of them were really, really cute. The illustrations were amazing. Like, I just love the illustrations in this book. They are gorgeous. So I'm gonna give this 4 stars. I really enjoyed most of the fairy tales. There were some that were a little bit obscure and not as interesting, and some of them that were kind of repetitive because the themes in classic fairy tales tend to be very similar. But other than that, I really enjoyed this, and I'm glad that I read it before I started to do the retellings because it was nice to be reminded of the exact stories for all of the fairy tales. So glad I read it, glad I started the readathon reading the classics, that I can now jump into all of my retellings that I plan to read for this readathon. The next prompt that I have to fulfill is to find a map that will lead me to the apple tree. And for that, there's a bunch of prompts, but one of them is to have a red cover or red in the cover. So I've decided to read Ruby Red. It's a red cover. It has the word red in the title. I can't fill this prompt any better than I am. Also, isn't this cover stunning? This cover is beautiful. This is a book that I picked up at a thrift store a couple months back. You can probably find it in a book haul that I've done relatively recently. It was one that I added. I think I had to buy a certain amount and you'd get a certain amount off. So I threw this in my cart not knowing anything about it other than that it was gorgeous, it was a retelling, and that's all I knew. So I threw it in my cart, but I'm really excited to try it for this readathon. So this is the start of a trilogy. I have since picked up the whole trilogy because the book is so beautiful that I wanted it for my shelves. And if I don't like it, that's okay. I got them all from used bookstores, so they weren't too expensive, but I think I'm gonna like it, so I have high hopes. This follows Gwen. Her family is part of a secret society of time travelers, and I love that this book has time travel, so that's gonna be fun. But she was not supposed to have the time travel gene. It was supposed to skip over her and go to her cousin Charlotte. However, they find out that they are wrong. Charlotte does not have the time traveling gene, but Gwyneth does. So Gwyneth is not ready to jump in to all the mysteries of this society and what they need to accomplish. She has not been prepared, and all of a sudden she is thrust into this society and what's going on. And that's where we start this book. So I'm excited to see how that plays out. What does the secret society need to accomplish? what is this time traveling like? I'm just excited to jump in. Hi everyone. Last night I had sprints on my channel and I only had 30 pages left of Ruby Red when we started the sprints. So I've obviously finished that on sprints last night. I actually really enjoyed this. I'm gonna give it 4 stars. The reason being is that this was very much just a setting up book. It was Gwen finding out that she has this gene and also kind of being told what's going on in this society and what they want from her and all the things that go with that. She does travel back in time a couple of times and that is starting, but we don't really delve into the meat and potatoes of this overarching storyline in this book. So I'm actually really glad I have the second and third books because I think those will have more of that in it. This was definitely just a setting up book. I'm sorry if you hear the birds outside. They are being very loud and I don't know if you can hear it in the camera, but they are squawking away outside and I'm sorry if you can hear that. We're just gonna ignore the birds, okay? Cool. Anyway, the one thing that I would say as a critique of this book is it reads very young. It is a YA book. However, I kept having to remind myself that she was 16. I would have thought more like a 12. It read very middle grade for me. Maybe the second and third books will not, but definitely for the first book, it really read middle grade. That is fine. I did not find that a problem because I like middle grade, but if you are not a reader of middle grade, that may be a problem if you're picking this up. So just keep that in mind. It's not a problem for me. Didn't deter from my enjoyment at all because I like to read middle grade, but that is the one thing that I would say about this is it reads very young. It reads very middle grade versus YA, or at least on the very young end of YA. It is classed YA, so I guess that's what they're doing, but yeah. I will definitely be picking up the second book fairly soon because I'm really interested to see kind of what happens. We learn something at the very end in the epilogue of this book that is definitely setting up something for the second book that I was very interested in continuing. I don't see it going on my December TBR just because December is very busy and there's so many books, but January is a possibility to continue this series because I'm interested and they're not very big. It was fairly easy to read fairly quickly. So because I only had 30 pages left of this last night when we started sprints, I finished it in the first sprint. So I started my second book for this readathon last night on sprints and read the first 50 pages of Horseman by Christina Henry. This is a Sleepy Hollow retelling. This is a horror retelling. It was originally on my October TBR, didn't get to it. It worked really well for the Once Upon a Readathon. So I put this in as a retelling. One thing I did notice in October was I was not a huge fan of a lot of the horror that I read. I'm starting to think horror is just not a genre that I particularly love. So we'll see if I jive with this. It is a retelling though, and I do like retellings. So if I like any horror, it's gonna be hopefully this one. We'll see. This follows a boy called Ben and his grandfather Brom. Brom, 30 years ago, chased Ichabod Crane out of Sleepy Hollow, and now things are starting to happen again in Sleepy Hollow, and people are whispering about the horseman. A headless body of a child has been found in the woods, and everyone is trying to figure out what is going on. The adults have always told the children that the horseman is not real. It's not real. It's a myth. But Ben is starting to think that maybe the adults have been lying to them and the horseman is real. So what is going on in the town of Sleepy Hollow? What is happening? I don't know. Like I said, I only read about 50 pages last night, so I'm not very far in, and I don't have a lot of thoughts yet. So I'm going to go finish this, and it shouldn't take very long. It's just 300 pages, and I have sprints again tonight. I'm on Crystal's channel for sprints. So we'll see if maybe I can even finish this today between what I can read before sprints and once I'm on sprints. We'll see what happens. It's a new dawn. It's a new day. I did finish Horseman yesterday. I finished it on the very last sprint on Crystal Sprints last night with 30 seconds left. She actually did an extra sprint just so that I could finish, and everyone in the comments wanted an extra sprint, so we did another one. And I have finished Horseman. This was a ride. I really liked this book for the first 2 parts. This book is written in part 1, part 2, part 3. And the first 2 parts of this book were great. They made sense. They were a new retelling of the Legends of Sleepy Hollow. We were following what has happened to these children who are coming up headless and handless. We are following Ben. I love Ben. Ben is a 14-year-old trans boy in this town of Sleepy Hollow, and he is trying to figure out what is going on. The adults are seemingly hiding things from him, and he is trying to track things down. We also watch Ben's struggle with a lot of people in this town accepting his identity, and then there's a couple people in his family who are fighting against his identity and trying to get him to conform to what they think he should be. And Ben fights back from that, and I just loved seeing that. I love seeing that play out. I wasn't expecting that in this book. I didn't even know the main character was trans until I started to read it. So that was all really interesting, and I had a good time with it. But the ending of this book, part 3, was not anything that I needed or wanted. And I was just like, what has happened? What has happened? It felt like the world's longest epilogue. And it was just not what I needed. And the ending was weird, but not in a good way. Well, actually, Crystal asked me on sprints what I thought. And I was like, honestly, I'm not going to decide until tomorrow when I update the vlog, because I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with this book, because I loved it and I also didn't like it. And I was very confused of how I felt. Because when part 1, part 2 was a 4-star, high 4-star situation. Really liked it. Part 3 was like a 2-star situation. So I've decided to go with 3 stars for the Horseman. And the last part was weird. But the first 2 parts were really good. So I'm torn. I've heard really good things about Christina Henry retellings, and I will say this was enjoyable up until the end, and I still am glad that I read it. So I think I will pick up another Christina Henry retelling. If you've read a Christina Henry, please let me know what your favorite one was. I know she has done a lot of retellings, and I would love to know which one maybe I should do next. This one is definitely not her most popular, so maybe this was not the best one to start with. So I am open to trying more. So let me know. 3 stars is still a good rating, but it would have been higher if it wasn't for that part 3 situation. It definitely would have been higher. But that's where we are. I liked a lot of things, and the last part was a little weird. So, the Horseman. We are on to the 4th prompt for Once Upon a Readathon, and I have decided to read The Shadow Queen by C.J. Redwine. This is a first in a retelling series. Each retelling is a different fairy tale. I don't know if you have to read them in order. I'll have to look into that, but that is what this is. This is clearly The Shadow Queen. It is a retelling of Snow White. I didn't have the book, so this is a library copy, which is why it's so shiny. So I'm gonna put it down because the lighting has decided to glow. So just know I'm reading The Shadow Queen, gonna put it down. So this is, like I said, a Snow White retelling. So this follows Lorelai. She has been exiled from her realm by her stepmother, Queen Irina, who is obviously the evil queen. And she has decided that now that she is older, she's been exiled since she was a child, that she is going to fight to get her realm back and make Irina pay for her father's life. And the only thing she can use is something that they both have in common, which is their magic. There is also a plot point of a prince in a neighboring realm, Cole, who his realm is being attacked by ogres, and he has to ask the Shadow Queen, Queen Irina, for help to defeat the ogres with her magic. And she trades that she will do this if he comes and becomes her personal huntsman to kill Lorelai. Basically, a very straight-on retelling of Snow White. Seems like they're sticking to the story pretty literally. So let's dive in and see what I think. I'm using this for the prompt contains magic because it says right in the synopsis that both Lorelai and Irina have magic. Let's jump in and get book 4 done for this readathon. Hi everyone, I have finished part 4 of my Once Upon a Readathon quest, and that was reading The Shadow Queen by CJ Redwine. I actually really enjoyed this retelling. This is the start of a series of retellings. I don't know at this point, since it is the first book, if they overlap at all or if you can read them out of order. I have a suspicion that you might be able to read them out of order, but don't quote me on that. The only reason I think that is I do have the second book in this series. I somehow owned the second book and not the first. Don't know how that happened. And none of the characters from this book were listed in the synopsis of book 2. That does not mean they are in there, but they might not be. So this is The Shadow Queen by CJ Redwine. I really enjoyed this. I'm giving it a 4-star. It does sit very close to a lot of the original story of Snow White. Well, maybe not the original, but there are so many adaptations of Snow White, and this does not veer too far from those. We have Lorelai. She is in hiding within Ravenspire, which is her country, from the evil queen, the Shadow Queen, Irina. Irina was married to Lorelai's father. Lorelai's father has died due to evil things that have happened from the queen, and Lorelai has gone into hiding to save herself and her brother Leo. They have been in hiding for a very long time. Lorelai is now older. She has mastered her magic and has decided to reclaim her throne from the evil queen. The best part of this book, though, was the other characters from this book, Cole and his country. Cole is from a neighboring country. He is the prince of this country, and his country is being attacked by ogres, and he needs help. He needs magical help to conquer these ogres. He goes to Irina, the Shadow Queen, to get that help, and is basically tricked into becoming her huntsman to kill Lorelai. The part that I loved so much was that Cole and his kingdom are dragons. They are humans. They have both a human heart and a dragon heart and can shift into dragons, his entire country. So there are dragons in this book. I did not expect there to be dragons, and I was very excited when there were dragons. It made my day when I found out there were dragons in this book. That's all I can tell you without going too much into the story. Obviously, I'm sure you know how it ends because it is a retelling of a very classic fairy tale, so it's not shocking. But I did really enjoy it. I definitely will be continuing with this series. I believe the next one is a Sleeping Beauty retelling, but I'm not going to be continuing with that right now because the next part of this vlog is the last quest that I need to do for Once Upon a Readathon. And the last thing I have to do is I need to climb that apple tree to get my apple, and I am going to be reading Dorothy Must Die by Daniel Page. I am so excited to read this retelling. I'm so excited. I'm using it to fill the prompt for the Morley Gray character because in this book, Dorothy is the villain. She has come to Oz. She has taken over. She is the villain. And I'm so excited. And the only hope for Oz is another girl coming from Kansas whose name is Amy. So basically, the synopsis says, I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be some kind of hero. What happened? Dorothy. My name is Amy Gunn, and I'm the other girl from Kansas, and I have a mission.
I'm so excited to read this book. The Wizard of Oz is one of my favorite children's series. I love The Wizard of Oz. It's just cozy and I just love it. So a retelling with a twist of Dorothy being evil. I'm very excited for this. Very, very, very excited. So let's get this done. Let's finish my Once Upon a Readathon retelling TBR strong with probably my most anticipated book on this TBR. I just got off Barb's Monday Night Sprints and I have given Dorothy Must Die a valiant effort. I am just under 200 pages, 197 pages into Dorothy Must Die. And I'm going to DNF this. I rarely DNF, but I have to with this one. But I will say this is not the book's fault. This is a me thing. I don't think the book is bad. I really don't. Which is kind of why I want to stop reading it instead of trying to force my way through it and rate a book poorly that is not a bad book. It's definitely a me thing. I thought I was going to love this book because I love The Wizard of Oz so much, and I think it's the opposite. I cannot wrap my mind around this version of Oz when I love Oz so much. This doesn't have because everything in this book is flipped, Oz doesn't have the magical quality that it does in the original books, and all my favorite characters are so different. In my head, when I heard the synopsis of this book, I guess and that's my fault. I knew Dorothy was evil, but I kind of expected all of the other characters to still be good and maybe wanting Amy to fight against Dorothy. And that's not the case, or at least not in the first 200 pages, and I can't get past it. The Tin Woodman is evil. The Scarecrow is evil. I haven't met the Lion yet, but it's been inferred to that he's evil. And I just can't wrap my head around it. And also, like I said, the whimsical quality of Oz is not in this book, and it's just not vibing with me. I'm just not vibing with it. But again, I think it's because I love the original series so much, and I just can't separate the two in my mind. I'm also having a hard time really connecting to the main character in this book, which is Amy Gum. I don't really have any interest in her storyline that much, so I'm just having a hard time connecting with this book. And I definitely, like I said, it's a me thing. It's not, I don't think it's the book. I do think it's me and just how much I love The Wizard of Oz. So I'm just gonna DNF it. And unfortunately, we're ending this vlog on a little bit of a low note, but like I said, I think it's me, not the book. So that is the end of Once Upon a Readathon. It's over. I can't believe this is over. I've read so many amazing retellings this month. Probably my favorite was The Shadow Queen. I really enjoyed The Shadow Queen. That was definitely my favorite book of this readathon. And I can't wait to continue on with that series in the new year. I'm quite excited about it. So thank you for sticking around if you made it through the vlog this long. Have you read any of these books? Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.